Good evening, everyone, and welcome to webinar number 2 of our Bhagavad-gita Satsang webinar series. I'm Hari-kirtana, and I'm very, very happy that I have this opportunity to be here with you. I'm even happier that you have chosen to take some time to be here with me. So thank you very much. If you are new to the webinar, my intention is to give you keys to unlock the secrets of the Bhagavad-gita that are secrets hiding in plain sight and just waiting for a bit of illumination. My goal is to help you to understand the Bhagavad-gita, be able to read the Bhagavad-gita on your own and develop a relationship with the text, and then integrate the teachings of the Bhagavad-gita directly into your life, because that is precisely what they are meant for. If you've been reading the Gita for many years, or if you have never read the Bhagavad-gita, if you are trying to read the Bhagavad-gita or have tried in the past and not gotten very far, whatever the situation is, whatever your relationship with the Bhagavad-gita is, I'm confident that something in our presentation will be helpful to you and will illuminate some aspect of the Bhagavad-gita for you. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get too far into our presentation this evening. You can adjust your audio settings. You should have some controls in the upper right-hand corner. And you can adjust or make sure that you're hearing everything properly. You have the opportunity to raise your hand. You should see a little hand operation. So if you can hear me, please raise your hand. Yay, hands raising. All righty. All right, I have complete faith then that you are all hearing me, because I'm seeing lots of little hands popping up. Okay, you can put your hands down now. Thank you very much. You will not need your camera or your microphone for this webinar. You can see me, but I cannot see you, and nor will I hear you, nor will the other people who are participating in the webinar hear you. But we can communicate. There is a question and answer box, and if you would be kind enough to type something into the question and answer box so that I can see that this is working. Jessica, go ahead and type something in the Q&A box. There'll be a moment here. Yeah, hi there, Jerica. Thank you very much. Hello there. Neil, Haribol, Neil Amadava. Oh, okay. Some of us have more than one name. All right, Jessica, thank you. Good evening. Something in the Q&A box. All right, thank you for playing. We have some parting gifts for you. Thea, something. Very good. All right. So it looks like the Q&A box is working, and I can see many of you who are not typing into the Q&A box. So all of you, thank you very much for coming. Now, if you have any actual questions during the course of our time together this evening, please go ahead and fire them away in real time. I will see them. I may not respond immediately. I may choose to finish a thought that I'm working on, lest it fly out of my head, but I will see your questions, and I, of course, at the end, I will ask for questions, but feel free to fire away in real time whenever a question arises. Okay, tonight's program. Let's try this one. Okay. We've taken care of our housekeeping. Very good. All right, so tonight's program. Here's what we're going to do. Chapter 1, Part 1. Observing the armies. I'm going to share the backstory. Is that what, are you seeing? All right. Someone type in the Q&A, are you seeing just one slide or my PowerPoint setup? Anyone just go ahead and Many slides. All right. So let's do something different then. Let's try this. Okay, now we have just one slide, right? Bingo. Okay, Jerica, thank you. All right. So tonight's program brought to you by Hari-kirtana Das. Find him at hari-kirtana.com. Chapter 1, Part 1. Elisa, thank you. Observing the armies. So I'm going to share with you the backstory of the Bhagavad-gita. Many times when we read the Bhagavad-gita, we open up to the first chapter and we see all these people that we've never heard of and names we can't pronounce, much less remember, and we have no idea who they are and what they're doing here and why is any of this happening. So I'm going to share with you the backstory of the Bhagavad-gita, how we got to where we are, how Arjuna got into the situation he finds himself in, and I'm going to share with you a couple of extra little side notes that don't play out specifically in the Bhagavad-gita, but provide a little extra context so that you can truly appreciate what's going on here. Okay, then we're going to look at the set of verses that follow the initial setup to foreshadow the victory of Arjuna and his brothers, known as the Pandavas collectively. And there are quite a few of them. There are quite a few little hints as to how this is going to play out. And then finally, we'll look at Krishna as a servant of his devotee, which is a very interesting bit of bhakti yoga theology. And that explains something very interesting and I think unique about the conception of the Supreme Being in the Bhagavad-gita and the nature or the potential of the relationship between the Supreme Person and all of us. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, but first, last week, just a very quick review before we get into tonight's program, what we covered last week. Why should one study the Bhagavad-gita at all? Why should one try to work through this story with all these people to get to the actual lessons of the Bhagavad-gita? Well, that's directly related to what the Bhagavad-gita is. The Bhagavad-gita is a book for people who would like to understand more about who they are, what the world is, how to respond to the world. Because what the Gita is a guidebook for people to do just that. It's a map. Another way to think about what the Gita is it's a look at the world and us from God's point of view. Krishna is speaking the Gita from the position of the Supreme Person. And he's telling Arjuna how his situation looks from his point of view. And by extension, he's telling us how our situation looks from his point of view. This is valuable information. If you know what the world looks like and what our lives look like from God's point of view, well, that can be useful. The Gita is a book of transcendental knowledge. So it tells us how to move through the world from a transcendental position, not necessarily how you just transcend the world and say, see ya, but how you work in the world and yet not be as directly affected by the world in the same way as when we're not in transcendental consciousness. The Gita is a book about Dharma. It's a book about how best to respond to your destiny. And the way that one should approach the Bhagavad-gita is, first of all, with humility and gratitude for the opportunity to receive this transcendental message, and then to hear the Gita from someone who's walking the talk. The Gita tells us how it is to be understood and how to recognize someone who has understood it. So when we read the Gita and we see or we understand what the person who has understood the Bhagavad-gita walks like, talks like, acts like, then we can look for such a person who themselves have heard about the Bhagavad-gita from a qualified teacher, and then have some faith that they are a reliable source of understanding the Bhagavad-gita. Okay, there you go. There's a genealogy of the Mahabharata. The Bhagavad-gita is a portion, a couple of chapters of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is a great epic, longer than the Odyssey and the Iliad combined. And this simple chart tells you how everyone is related to one another. So just take a look at the chart for a second. Okay, any questions? All right, I'm going to simplify this, or at least explain to you where all these relationships are in relationship to one another, who all these people are in relationship to one another, and why it matters insofar as the Bhagavad-gita is concerned. The Bhagavad-gita takes up, depending on how you cut it, either chapters 25 through 42 or 23 through 40. This section is called the Bhishma Parva portion of the Mahabharata. We began with our first verse. Dhritarashtra is sitting back at the palace, and he asks his secretary, his personal confidant, Sanjaya, what has transpired on the battlefield. And Sanjaya is the narrator of the Bhagavad-gita. So Dhritarashtra only gets this one line, and he starts by saying Dharmik Kshetra, Kurukshetra, Samaveta Yuyutsavaha. When my sons and the sons of my late brother Pandu gathered together on the battlefield, the field of Dharma at Kurukshetra, desiring to fight, what did they do? How did they act? How did they respond to their destiny? So the first question is, who is Dhritarashtra? And why does he want to know? To understand who Dhritarashtra is, we have to go back a little bit in the genealogy and understand who this person is. This is Bhishma. Bhishma, at the time of the gathering of the armies on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, is the grandsire of the entire dynasty. And that dynasty is now split into two factions who are on either side of the battlefield. Bhishma plays a pivotal role in how everyone happens to be here, happens to come here. Okay, here we go. Bhishma's father is King Santanu. And King Santanu has a relationship with Ganga Devi. In other words, the Ganges River personified. She and King Santanu have a child, and this is Bhishma. So Bhishma spends his early childhood being educated in the heavenly planets by the demigods. He's the, he reaps the benefit of his celestial connection to Ganga Devi, who herself is a demigod. Bathing in her waters can purify your whole existence. And then returns to Earth to take up his responsibilities as the son of the king. Ganga Devi leaves, she exits stage right, and King Santanu subsequently falls in love with a woman named Satyavati. However, Satyavati's father does not agree to allow his daughter to marry the king, even though he's the king. You would think that the king would just get his way, but no, Satyavati's father insists that she will only marry him if her sons inherit Santanu's throne. And what this means is that Bhishma and any sons he might have would be bypassed in the line of succession. So King Santanu is very depressed because he really wants to be with Satyavati. Bhishma notices that his father is very unhappy and asks the chariot driver, "Where did you take my father?" So Bhishma goes to Satyavati's father and asks him what the story is. Satyavati's father tells Bhishma about his terms, about how his father desires his daughter and what the terms are. And Bhishma, wanting the happiness of his father, takes a vow of celibacy in order to ensure Satyavati's father that there will be no heir coming from him to take the throne. Thereafter, Santanu marries Satyavati and has two sons, Chitrangada and Vichitravirya. However, Chitrangada dies very quickly, and so now the succession, the line of succession, depends entirely on Vichitravirya. So there's your first sequence of drama. Okay. Wanting to waste no time in order to secure a wife for the remaining son, Bhishma kidnaps 3 princesses. Now, this was actually part of the culture, that a member of the warrior class desiring a bride would kidnap a princess. And usually the princess was kind of in on the deal. Like, it wasn't just a one-way, non-consensual thing where they had to put up with their kidnapper. In fact, in some cases, they would ask to be kidnapped. And in fact, Krishna's first wife, Rukmini, was to be married to some other guy that her brother wanted her to marry. And so she sent a message secretly to Krishna saying, "Hey, I'm not into this guy. I'd really like to be with you. How about you come and kidnap me?" And Krishna does. On her wedding day, he scoops her up, takes her on his chariot, rides away, and all the princes who were the buddies of the groom take off chasing them, and it's Rukmini in the back of the chariot who's actually firing the arrows at their pursuers while Krishna is driving the chariot, the getaway chariot. So just so we understand, it's not just a one-way street on the kidnapping thing. Now, in this case, Bhishma really only wanted to kidnap one of these princesses, but there were 3 sisters who were all in the same room at the same time. And he thought, well, I'm not going to get away with this unless I take all 3. So he does. Now, in this particular case, Amba, the first sister, rejects the whole idea of being married to Vichitravirya because she's already given her heart to some other guy. She already had like the whole plan of how it was going to be with some other prince. And she's mad that Bhishma has kind of mucked up the works for her. And Bhishma says, "Look, no problem. I'm really sorry. Stay the night and then go home tomorrow and I'll work it all out for you." But when Amba returns to her home the next day, her former lover rejects her. It turns out he was kind of a jerk. He's like, "Well, you know, you spent the night in some other guy's palace, and so forget it. I don't want to marry you anymore." And now she realizes that Bhishma has ruined her life, that this guy's not going to marry her. No prince is going to marry her. The whole life that she thought she was going to have as a princess and then a queen, and all, it's totally wrecked. So Amba vows revenge on Bhishma. Now, this is not going to be easy because Bhishma also has another benediction by virtue of his celestial connections and his virtuous, otherwise virtuous state of being. He can choose the time of his death, unlike us. But Amba vows that she will destroy Bhishma. She goes to the forest and does incredibly severe penances and austerities and mystic yoga. And the sages in the forest want to know, like, girl, what's up with you? And she tells them the story. And word gets around, and eventually Shiva, the great Mahadev Shiva, hears her story and sees how intensely she is performing yoga in order to gain the power to destroy Bhishma. And so Shiva gives Amba the benediction. You will take a future birth and you will be able to have your revenge. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Ambika and Ambalika accept betrothal to Vichitravirya. They're fine with it. And so Vichitravirya promptly dies right after their wedding. More drama. Now, there's a problem. Bhishma refuses to give up his vow and step in as a surrogate for his half-brother because he's taken a vow of celibacy and he's not going to give it up. So we have a crisis insofar as how is there going to be a successor to the throne? Satyavati has a plan and a secret. Satyavati actually has a son prior to her marriage by the sage Parashuram. And that son is the great sage Vyasa, the half-brother of Vichitravirya that nobody knew about. People knew who Vyasa was because he was a great sage, but they did not know the nature of his parentage. So Satyavati reveals this secret to Bhishma, who approves of the plan now to bring in Vyasa, the other half-brother of Vichitravirya, as a surrogate in order to beget sons that may someday inherit the throne. Okay, Vyasa agrees, appears at the palace, and at the request of his mother. His mother makes the request. Vyasa says, very well, I will do this. So Ambika is the first to meet Vyasadeva in the bedchamber in which they will have an intimate encounter that presumably will produce an heir. Now, Ambika is a princess. She's a young princess. And, you know, when princesses think about romantic encounters, you know, they have their own conception of, you know, being swept off their feet by a dashing young prince. You know, maybe somebody who looks like this guy. And, you know, he's a handsome fellow and probably charming and all that stuff. He may even be Prince Charming, for all I know. And, you know, that's the reasonable expectation of a princess. However, this is Vyas. He doesn't quite look the same as a prince. In fact, this is probably a generous rendition. Vyasa is described as being really quite scary looking. He's blue, for one thing, and he's got matted hair, and he looks like the kind of guy who's been sitting out in the foothills of the Himalayas for the last who knows how many years, just doing extreme, extraordinary yoga. Now, he's completely self-realized. He's just not that attractive. So, Ambika dutifully goes through with their union, but she keeps her eyes closed the whole time because she really just can't bring herself to look at Vyas because he's just so scary looking. The result, Vyasadeva tells her that she will have a son who will be strong like she is, proud like she is, and blind on account of her having kept her eyes closed the entire time. Thus, Ambika and Vyasadeva their union produces the son Dhritarashtra, who speaks the first line of the Bhagavad-gita, and he is born blind. And as a result, he is disqualified to be in line for the throne. Ambalika is next. And she hears what happened with Ambika, and she now realizes, okay, I have to keep my eyes open. But the sight of Vyasa just makes her turn a whiter shade of pale. She turns ghostly white. And as a result, Vyasa tells her that she will have a son who is noble, kind, and pale. So their union produces Pandu. So Pandu, even though he is the younger son, is now next in line for the throne, much as it will turn out to Dhritarashtra's frustration. And Pandu's sons, rather than Dhritarashtra's sons, will also be the rightful heirs to the throne in due course of time. A year later, Satyavati thinks, you know, we had two guys before and they both died. So a third time's a charm. Let's just get one more guy, one more son to get our odds better that we'll have someone who will be able to succeed to the throne. Ambika is like just so embarrassed by what happened the first time. She just can't deal with it. So she sends the maidservant in her place. And unlike the two princesses, the maidservant actually has spiritual vision. She can see the spiritual radiance that Vyasa has as a self-realized sage. And she's very grateful for the opportunity to have such an intimate union with such an extraordinary personality, irrespective of his outward appearance. So the result here, Vyasadeva says, is a son who will be wise. And that son is named Vidura. And Vidura plays no part in the Bhagavad-gita whatsoever, because he offers good advice to his older brother Dhritarashtra, which he ignores, and his son, Duryodhana, gives him grief for it. And so Vidura says, you know what? You guys do what you want. I'm out of here. And he goes on a spiritual pilgrimage. So he's totally out of town when the Battle of Kurukshetra takes place. Wise. Okay. Dhritarashtra marries Gandhari, the daughter of the king of the province that is now known as Kandahar. The union of Dhritarashtra and Gandhari results in Duryodhana, the eldest son, plus 99 others. How it is that Gandhari has 100 sons, we'll talk about that another time. Pandu marries two princesses, Kunti and Madri. And Pandu has a problem. Whenever one reads about hunting in the Vedic literature, you can bet that something will go wrong. The warrior class, the royal order, has license to go hunting because they have to sharpen their fighting skills somehow. So they have to become good archers. Otherwise, when it's time to fight a real battle, they won't have had any practice. Pandu goes on a hunting expedition and he sees a deer. We can't see them clearly, but he knows that they're there. And he fires his arrow and mortally wounds them. It turns out that actually there were two deer, a male and a female, and they were enjoying an intimate frolic at the moment that Pandu's arrow struck. But they were not ordinary deer. They were actually great mystic yogis, husband and wife team of mystic yogis, just so you know that that's possible. And because they had mystic powers, they were playing as deer. They could take the form of deer, and they were playing as deer for the sake of enjoying their sexual activities. Now, why they chose to role play as deer is anyone's guess. But resuming their shape, Pandu realizes he has done something awful. And with his dying breath, the male sage says, "I curse you that should you ever attempt to enjoy the pleasures of lovemaking, you will die." So now, once again, we have a problem with the line of succession. How is Pandu going to have an heir? Well, Kunti has a plan and a secret. When she was a young woman, a teenager, Kunti received a benediction, a mantra from the sage Durvasa Muni. Durvasa Muni was well known to be very short-tempered. He was extremely picky, very difficult to please, and if he and his entourage ever showed up at your door, you're just going to be a nervous wreck because you have to feed him, you have to be nice to him, you have to feed his entourage, everything has to be done very nice, high-level spiritual, Brahminical kind of way. And if anything went wrong, he'd be really mad, and who knows what kind of curse he might lay on you. So when Durvasa Muni and his party arrived at Kunti's parents' home, Kunti was such a gracious hostess. She was so expert that she was asked to take care of Durvasa and his party. And she did such a great job. Not only was he not mad about anything, he was so pleased that he gave her a special mantra. That mantra would allow Kunti to call any demigod to beget a child with her. She tells Pandu and Madri that here's our way around this. We can get a demigod to be a surrogate to stand in for you, and that way we can still have sons. Pandu agrees, but there's something she doesn't tell Pandu. She actually tested this mantra when she was a teenage girl, long before her marriage to Pandu. She got curious. She wanted to know if it was going to work. So she tried it out, and she called for Surya, the sun god, as in Surya Namaskars. And Surya shows up. It worked. And Kunti is like, oh, great, it works. But look, you know, I'm really not ready to do this sort of thing with anybody. I just really wanted to see if the mantra would work. So thanks for coming, and bye? No. Surya tells her the mantra is such that we are obliged to do this. But because I'm the sun god, I can do some pretty far out stuff, including get you pregnant without you losing your virginity. Now, clearly only someone on the level of the sun god can know how to do this. She says, okay, if the mantra obliges us and you can preserve my virginity and I can have a child somehow, great, that's what we'll do. So a great warrior is born to Kunti by way of Surya, but she keeps her pregnancy secret. Nobody knows somehow that this has happened. And nobody can know that she has this child. So she secretly gives up the child, bundles him up, puts him in a straw floating basket, and sends him down the river, knowing that he will, or having faith that he will come to a bend in the river where people will find him. She asks Surya to please protect this child. And with great difficulty, she lets the child go to an uncertain future. So Kunti only tells Pandu about the mantra, but not about her son by Surya. So this part is still a secret. Kunti calls Yamaraj, the god of justice. And he is one of the experts in Dharma, and Yudhisthira is born of the union of Yamaraj and Kunti. Yudhisthira is Dharma personified. The next year, Kunti calls on the demigod Vayu, the god of the wind, and from her union with Vayu, Bhima is born. Very, very powerful. A year later, Kunti summons the demigod Indra, presiding deity of the heavenly planets. And from her union with Indra, Arjuna is born. And his particular quality is extraordinary skill, especially in the martial arts. Now here's a far out thing about this mantra. Apparently, it's transferable. Kunti lets Madri borrow her mantra. And so Madri calls the Aswini Kumars, the physicians of the demigods, two guys, and from them, she is able to beget twins named Nakula and Sahadev. So altogether, you now have the 5 Pandavas, the sons of Pandu by way of surrogate fathers. And it is Arjuna and his 4 brothers who are on the battlefield facing Duryodhana and his brothers and his army. So Pandu eventually is overcome by sexual desire for Madri. And even though Madri tells him, this is a bad idea, you know about the curse, you're gonna die, this is like, and he can't help it. Sure enough, curse comes true, Pandu dies. Madri enters the funeral pyre and disappears with Pandu, leaving Kunti now as a single mother with 5 sons. All this time, they've been away from the kingdom called Hastinapura. And Kunti, as a single mother with her 5 sons, returns to the kingdom. These are now young sons. And Dhritarashtra is now obliged to give shelter to Kunti and the 5 sons until the oldest, Yudhisthira, is ready to ascend to the throne. Dhritarashtra now is a placeholder king. So Dhritarashtra, the blind king, has been passed over for legitimate succession. He's only kind of a placeholder king. And Duryodhana, his eldest son, is also passed over because the line goes from Pandu now to Yudhisthira, and he is in line for the throne. And Duryodhana hates this. I mean, really hates it. He hates it so much that he plots to do everything he can to get rid of the Pandavas. There are assassination attempts that fail. There are gambling matches with loaded dice in order to get the Pandavas to gamble away their kingdom and lose. There's exile. There's just everything you can imagine that Duryodhana can think of to try to get rid of the Pandavas. And at every turn, he is thwarted because the Pandavas are being protected by Krishna. Eventually, it comes down to this. The Pandavas try to negotiate some simple deal. Just a humble portion of the kingdom will do. You know, we don't have to have the whole thing. Just give us small areas to rule over, because that's just what we have to do. And Duryodhana says, no, I will not give you enough land to place a pin into. So all the diplomatic alternatives have been thwarted, and now that's why we're on the battlefield. So Sanjaya is Dhritarashtra's right-hand man, and Dhritarashtra can ask him what's happening on the battlefield by virtue of the fact that Sanjaya has mystic vision thanks to his guru, Vyas. And he can see what has happened in places far, far away. So now I'm going to read just the English translation of the verses, because now we're up to date. Now we're actually at the start. And so I'm going to share with you these verses and then clear up some of the characters that we hear about on the battlefield. So here we go. This is now verse number 2. Sanjaya said, after seeing the army of the sons of Pandu deployed in battle formation, your son, Duryodhana, approached his teacher and spoke the following words. So Duryodhana's teacher is named Drona, and Drona is also the teacher of Arjuna. So he is the preeminent martial arts guru, and he has taught not only Duryodhana, but his arch enemy, Arjuna. Drona has also taught Drishtadyumna, which shows up now in the next verse. So now this is Duryodhana speaking to Drona. O my teacher, behold the great army of the Pandavas, so skillfully arranged by your disciple, the son of Drupad. So the son of Drupad is Drishtadyumna. He is the general in charge of organizing the Pandava army. And not only that, he can kill Drona. Drona and Drupad got into something, and therefore Drupad got the benediction that he would have a son who could kill Drona. And then that very same son, Drishtadyumna, was trained by Drona, even though Drona knew, because he was a Brahmin, because he was an elevated person and did things dutifully rather than out of spite or envy. He trained the person who he knew had the benediction of that he could kill him. So Duryodhana is telling Drona, check it out, your student has like arranged a really nice army to fight us. You know, kind of like, thanks a lot. It's kind of a backhanded comment. So the next verse, here are their heroes, mighty archers, equal in skill to Bhima and Arjuna, Yuyudhana, Virata, and the great chariot warrior Drupad. So Drupad himself is also on the battlefield here. He continues in verse 5, Drishtaketu, Chekitana, and the powerful king of Kashi, Purujit, Kunti Bhojas, and Shaibya, foremost among men. Verse 6, the mighty Yadu of Subhadra and the sons of Draupadi, all great chariot fighters. So Drishtadyumna is the son of King Drupad. They're both on the battlefield. He is also the brother of Draupadi, whose sons are on the battlefield. Draupadi is the wife of all 5 Pandavas. How she becomes the wife of 5 guys is a whole other story. But in this culture, in some special situations, men can have more than one wife, and in this case, Draupadi can have more than one husband. There is another son of Drupad. Drishtadyumna has another brother who is not mentioned in this verse, and yet, as we will see, is an important character. Subhadra, also mentioned in this verse, her son is on the battlefield. Subhadra is Arjuna's other wife and Krishna's sister. Krishna is related to Arjuna as a friend, as a cousin, because Kunti, Arjuna's mother, is Krishna's aunt, and Subhadra is Krishna's sister. So Arjuna and Krishna are also brothers-in-law. there is in the next verse, O best, 7 now, O best of the twice born, know as well highly qualified leaders of my forces, and I will tell you about them. There is your good self, whom we have already discussed, Drona. Bhishma, who we have already discussed, the grandsire and the most important, most powerful warrior on the battlefield, and then Karna and Kripa, as well as Ashvatthama, Vikarna, the son of Somadatta, who are sure to be victorious in battle. Karna on this list is the most important because he is the long-lost son of Kunti and Surya. Now, if you want to understand Karna and what he's been through and what his mood is, go see Black Panther and follow the Michael Jordan character, because it's kind of like that. Verse number 9, many other heroes are prepared to risk their lives for my sake. Well equipped with a variety of weapons, they are expert. We're going to come back to that first. If you have any questions, we have some questions?
Yes.
Okay.
So Jessica Thomas says, wait, why was Duryodhana passed over?
Because he was blind. Duryodhana, so Jessica, thank you for your question. Because Duryodhana was born blind, both physically and also spiritually. So this impediment in this particular tradition, this particular culture, is enough to disqualify you. So that's why he was passed over.
And just wanted to point out that Neela Madhava
yes.
is watching from Kabul.
Oh, so you're very close to Kandahar, which is Gandhari's hometown. Yes, cool. All right, very good. So there was another question. Amba was not in on the kidnapping. Yes, that's correct. This was a surprise. Bhishma just showed up unannounced. There was no plot here. Whereas in other cases, we find that the tradition is that the princess actually chooses her husband. Even though there's a contest, the guy she chooses has to win a contest, but she actually gets the say in who the front runner is, who gets first shot. In this case, that wasn't how it happened. Bhishma just showed up. Okay, so verse number 1, Dharmakshetra Kurukshetra, immediately foreshadows the victory of Yudhisthira and his brothers, including Arjuna, because Yudhisthira and the rest of the Pandava brothers are righteous. Yudhisthira is Dharma personified, and they've taken the high road at every turn, whereas Duryodhana and his allies have been the dirty tricksters from start to finish. So Dhritarashtra is concerned that his sons are going to be at a disadvantage simply on account of their location is a place where Dharma prevails. The second, one of the reasons that Duryodhana gives his teacher a backhanded kind of compliment is because he wants to get him riled up to fight against his students, one of whom has the capability of killing him, and the other is an expert fighter, thanks to his tutelage. So Duryodhana is concerned that Drona might really not have his heart in fighting against his own students. Notice in verse 9 where we left off, many other heroes are prepared to risk their lives for my sake. That foretells that, in fact, their lives will be sacrificed for the sake of Duryodhana's desire to rid himself of the Pandavas. Verse 11. So I'm going to read these next two verses, 10 and 11. Perfectly shielded by Bhishma, our strength is immeasurable. Again, this is Duryodhana speaking. The strength of the Pandavas, though carefully guarded by Bhima, is limited. Turning to address all of his military leaders, Duryodhana then says, all of you, without exception, must be certain to arrange your battle formations in such a way as to give full support to Bhishma. So Duryodhana understands that without Bhishma, he's sure to lose. And therefore, and Bhishma is the grandsire, he's old, even though he's the greatest warrior on the battlefield, he's also the senior guy. So it's imperative that Duryodhana protect Bhishma. But let's go back to verse 3. Remember, there is the unmentioned other son of Drupad, brother of Drishtadyumna, and that person is Sikhandi. Sikhandi is not mentioned in the Bhagavad-gita, but in the Battle of Kurukshetra will play a very, very pivotal role because Sikhandi actually is Amba, reincarnates as Sikhandi to fulfill her vow to destroy Bhishma. So Duryodhana's worried about the wrong person. He's worried about Drishtadyumna when he should really be worried about Sikhandi, because it is Sikhandi who will, on the battlefield, bring about the destruction of Bhishma. Verse 14 and verse 19 also foreshadow the victory of the Pandavas. So I'll read verse 14. Reading up to 14. Sanjaya now continues his narration. To the delight of Duryodhana, the valiant grandsire of the Kuru dynasty, Bhishma roared like a lion triumphantly and blew his conch shell. 13, the conch shells and kettle drums, cymbals and other drums and trumpets and various horns were suddenly sounded together in a tumultuous uproar. Basically, battle cries. Verse 14, on the other side, Madhava, another name for Krishna, and the son of Pandu, Arjuna, standing on a magnificent chariot, which was given to Arjuna by the fire god, Agni, drawn by white horses, blew their transcendental conch shells. So immediately we can understand that the conch shells possessed by Arjuna and Krishna are categorically different. The Lord of the senses, Krishna, blew his conch shell, called Panchajanya. The winner of wealth, Arjuna, blew his conch shell, called Devadatta, the voracious eater, whose strength and action is terrifying to behold. Bhishma blew his great conch, called Poundra. We will skip down as everyone blows their conch shells. Reverberating, this is now verse 19. Reverberating throughout the sky and across the surface of the earth, the uproarious sound shattered the hearts of the sons of Dhritarashtra. So the Kauravas is another name for the sons of Dhritarashtra, whereas the Pandavas are the names of the 5 sons of Pandu. The next verse, verse 20. From his chariot, decorated with the banner of Hanuman, so the presence of Hanuman by virtue of the flag, also assures certain victory, just as Hanuman was instrumental in the victory of Ram over Ravana. That is the story of the Ramayana, which is a whole other story. The son of Pandu, Arjuna, surveyed the military formation of the sons of Dhritarashtra. Then, O king, he raised his bow in preparation to fire his weapons and addressed the Lord of the senses, Krishna, with these words. So the presence of Krishna is also a foreshadowing of victory. Krishna vowed that he would not fight in this battle, but he had a whole army, and his army would fight. And he gave Duryodhana and Arjuna a choice of whether to take Krishna, who would not fight, or his army, which would. Arjuna got the first choice and said, I will take you rather than your army, Krishna. So Duryodhana thought that was great. He took Krishna's army. And Krishna said, all right, I'm not going to fight, but I will drive your chariot for you. Krishna becomes the servant of his devotee. So I'll read verses 21 through 24. Arjuna said, O infallible one, Krishna, please place my chariot between the two armies so that I may see who has assembled here, eager to do battle, and with whom I must engage in this great trial of arms. Verse 23, let me see those who have come here to fight for the sake of pleasing the evil-minded son of Dhritarashtra. 24, Sanjaya said, O descendant of Bharat, referring to Dhritarashtra, the Lord of the senses, Krishna, having been thus addressed by the conqueror of sleep, Arjuna, placed the finest of chariots between the two armies. So we see that Krishna, who we understand to be the supreme person, obeys the request of Arjuna to take the chariot out into the middle of the battlefield, and that way Arjuna can see who's there. That's where we're going to pick up next time. But meanwhile, before we do, as will always be the case in our webinars, there will be at least one verse where we chant the Sanskrit and call and response. So I chant, you chant back. This is Bhagavad-gita 124. Sanjaya uvacha evam yukto hrishikesho gudakeshena bharataha senayoru bhayor madhye stapayit varatho tamam. The translation, Sanjaya said, O descendant of Bharat, Dhritarashtra, the Lord of the senses, Krishna, having been thus addressed by the conqueror of sleep, Arjuna, placed the finest of chariots between the two armies. So this is significant in that Krishna is the Lord of the senses, and Arjuna is the conqueror of sleep, and indicates that Arjuna, who's about to fall into a state of disorientation, will eventually conquer this disorientation with the help of the Lord of the senses, who will wake him up. All right, here's what we just covered. Chapter 1, Part 1, Observing the Armies. The backstory, you now know who these people are, how it all rolled up into this crazy situation of these two armies engaged in a fratricidal war to decide who will actually inherit the kingdom, either the Pandavas, who actually have the legitimate claim, or the envious Duryodhana, who with the help of his father Dhritarashtra has conspired to reroute the line of succession to himself. We have seen how some of the verses in this section of the first chapter foreshadow the victory of Arjuna and his brothers. And we see how Krishna, the supreme person, becomes the servant of his devotee and engages in a relationship where he is subordinate to the devotee, even though he's the supreme person and the object of devotion. Any questions? We may run over just a few minutes. I hope you will indulge me for those few minutes. And if you have any questions, I will take them if they're going to be. Just go ahead and type into the question field. You don't have to raise your hand. I will be able to see your question if you just go ahead and type it in. Hmm?
Like Addison and have your hands raised.
Okay. So while I'm waiting for you to type your question rather than raise your hand, if you have questions, there we go. Is there a guide who, if you will easily understand who is who? Yes, there is. And I'm going to tell you in just a moment a couple of resources for you to be able to easily access this story of the Mahabharata, of which the Bhagavad-gita is a part, so you can get a sense of the relationships in a very easy way. All right. If you have, okay, Shamala Devi Dasi says, just glad this is recorded. Okay. Geraldine, just want to say, oh, thanks so much. I love the chanting. Very good. Thank you very much. All right. If you have questions after the fact, please email me, Hari@Hari-kirtana.com. I am always very happy to receive your correspondence. Okay. Some other resources. There's a lecture series on the Mahabharata by H.D. Goswami. Last week, I recommended his particular translation of the Bhagavad-gita. And this is a very wonderful lecture on the Mahabharata. Susan, thank you very much for reminding me about this, because that's how I remembered. So thank you very much. There's your URL that you can go to access this wonderful lecture series. This book, Mahabharata, The Eternal Quest by Andy Frankel, this is the answer to the question, where's the easy guide, Jerica? This book, even though the Mahabharata is enormous, this is actually relatively small book. See, it's only that thick. I have it right here. And he's an expert storyteller. So this is a very easy way to enter into the intricacies of these relationships and be able to get a sense of who these characters are on a deeper level. And still, it's so simple and accessible, you'll be easily able to keep track of who's who here. Now, here's the thing. The rest of the Bhagavad-gita, none of these characters show up. You don't have to keep track of any of these people for the sake of the Bhagavad-gita. The only people who are involved in the Bhagavad-gita from here on out are Arjuna, who's now going to find himself with a problem, Krishna, who helps Arjuna move through his problem, and Sanjaya, who will show up again at the end to give you a post-game wrap-up and tell you what the takeaway really is. So you don't have to worry about keeping track of all these characters as far as the Bhagavad-gita is concerned, because it's all about the setup here. We don't have to keep track of these folks any further. If you have not already done so, please visit my website and subscribe to this offering, Awaken Your Spiritual Vision, a 45-minute audio training. It's totally free. And it's a nice way to experience an encapsulated overview of the Bhagavad-gita. There is also my book, In Search of the Highest Truth. It's not as free as the audio class, but hopefully it's worth every penny you pay for it. Next week, Chapter 1, Part 2, Arjuna's Despair, verses 25 through 46. We will hear about Arjuna's reasons for not fighting. If anyone would like to offer any last thoughts on our evening together, of course, I would be very, very happy to hear them. I'm very, very grateful that so many of you have chosen to spend this time with me. Geraldine, you're very, very welcome. My pleasure. Neela Madhava, thank you so much for tuning in from the other side of the planet. Anne, thank you so much. Jessica, you're very welcome. It is, of course, a pleasure. Jerica, as well. I am looking forward to next week and many weeks ahead, spending this time with you to go deeper into the Bhagavad-gita. Again, if you have any other questions, Hari@Hari-kirtana.com. Please feel free to contact me. there. All right. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I look forward to seeing you here next time.